a day for reading. We haven't done a book show for a while with our old friend, dear friend, Bethanne Patrick, the book critic of the Los Angeles Times, a very well-published writer who reads everything, the best-read woman, I think, or perhaps best-read person in America. Last time we did a show with Bethanne, it was about how the Facebook generation has gotten the Gatsby we deserve. She was reviewing Sarah Wynne Williams's Careless People, which became a bestseller. And of course, 2025 is the 100th year anniversary of The Great Gatsby. According to the New York Times, it's Gatsby's world. We just live in it. And I wonder whether, to continue the theme of getting the Gatsby we deserve, we get the books we deserve. Bethanne is doing a summary, and I'm thrilled she's joining us. Bethanne, do we get the books we deserve? Let's begin with one of your interesting books for the late spring of 2025, nonfiction books. The Sisterhood of Ravensbrück, how an intrepid band of French women resisted the Nazis and Hitler's all-female concentration camp. The only thing missing from there is some lesbianism, which I'm sure is in the book. Do we get the books we deserve, particularly when it comes to the Holocaust?
I'm sorry. First of all, I just want to say thanks for having me back on the show. I'm really glad to be here. And could that image of me from the previous show be any more unflattering? That's okay, because, you know, Gatsby is a book that shows some unflattering sides of our society. And you know what I just read before I start talking about the Lynn Olson book is that people are starting to reconsider Gatsby as a stalker tale, which I thought was really intriguing.
Who's stalking who?
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? Is Jay stalking Daisy? Is Tom stalking everyone? I don't know, but let's talk about the Sisterhood of Ravensbrück. This is a really important book, and I'll tell you, it's important because of Olson's research, but what's really remarkable is that it is an immensely readable book. She has great skills of narration, and this is not a book that you're going to be bored with. It's not a history book. That is, there's sad, very hard stuff in here, but there's also incredible hope and determination and strength from these women. So it's the true story behind the novel that many readers and
we hear it's a true story. I mean, I'm certainly not a historian, but I wonder.
No, it is a true story. No, but it's a woman named Martha Hall Kelly wrote Lilac Girls, a novel about this group of women, and so these women. They're the four that Olson focuses on are Germaine Tillion, Agnès Girard, Geneviève de Gaulle, who was a niece of Charles de Gaulle, and Jacqueline d'Alincourt, and they were all members of the French resistance. They were rounded up and put into Ravensbrück, which was an all-female concentration camp, but they managed to defy their captors in every way they could. They practiced what we sometimes call passive resistance, which is not the best term. They, wouldn't do their work. They might mess something up deliberately, but it's actually what these women did after the war. They survived, and they founded and I can't pronounce it really beautifully. They founded something called ADIR, A-D-I-R, and it was for women who had been displaced or members of the resistance. This is significant, Andrew, because the French were pretty misogynist when it came to post-war reparations and honors. Men received many, many medals here, there, and everywhere. Women did not. And so the efforts of these four women to make sure that women who had given their all for the resistance had some welfare support. Maybe they were unhoused and they needed somewhere to go. Maybe they needed money for food. ADIR provided that for them. So this is a wonderful book. It has, again, a lot of grim detail about Ravensbrück itself, but it is ultimately a story of how people can triumph over their oppressors.
Yeah, I take all your points, but whether, again, I'm not a Holocaust expert, though we've done a lot of shows on the Holocaust. I mean, Ravensbrück, as you say, was I mean, whether you call it it certainly wasn't a death camp in the way that Auschwitz or
Right.
Belsen was.
Right.
And I mean, anyone in those death camps who refused to work was immediately put to death. Leaving aside this book, I mean, this obsession with publishing with the Second World War and resistance to Nazism. We've done a number of shows on that too, Bethanne. Is this the genre we deserve of making us feel better about now all dead French women who, no doubt heroic, remarkably brave women who resisted the Nazis? Does that make us feel better in our weird age of Donald Trump and other authoritarians? We're not even quite sure how to resist these people.
Listen, I am with you, Andrew, when it comes to, there's a surfeit of books about World War II. But I think this one is relevant because of these women themselves. This is not just another book about World War II and its horrors. It's about, let me put it this way. By the end of World War II, there were about 1,100 men, maybe a little less, who were given medals as heroes of the French liberation by de Gaulle, okay? How many of those were women? 6. And so this just shows how ignored and marginalized women's efforts were. That's to me what this book is about. It's not simply another book about Hitler was evil, the Nazis were terrible. This was, the only thing we can be proud of because it was black and white, that sort of thing. What's important here to me is the feminist element in The Sisters of Ravensbrück. It's a book that shows that even when a society says you don't matter, the people who are told they don't matter can rise up and can make a difference. I'm not saying that it is perfect or that this has lasted for decades, but it certainly is a message that in our age where women are being sent further and further back along the way to, old ways of dealing with women as, wives and mothers instead of as full human beings with equal rights.
Again, I take your point, but
Yeah.
I have to admit a degree of skepticism here. I mean, not necessarily about the book, but about this whole argument. The Nazis were uniquely evil,
Yes.
mass murderers on an industrial scale that never existed before or after. Why use that as a backdrop, if you like, for feminism? There's so many other arguments one could use in this book. I mean, I haven't read it. You obviously have. The Sisterhood of Ravensbrück. Did this, what the subtitle of the book called, did this intrepid band of French women, did they understand the pure evil of this regime? I mean, 2 women come to mind, Simone Weil, a very distinguished French philosopher who did all her work during the Second World War, and of course Arendt, who spent part of the Second World War in France.
Yes.
Were these women philosophical in a sense? Did they understand that what they were dealing with in Ravensbrück and with the Nazis was uniquely evil?
I think they did. They completely understood that they were dealing with something that was efficient in its dedication to destruction and evil and torture. They knew that, but they did not lose their hope. And this is so important because right now, Andrew, we have to have something to hold on to. And to see that they could hold on to each other and hold on to their ideals and the things that they had fought for as members of the resistance. Remember, it would have been very easy for any or all of them to just bow to Vichy France's government. To be part of the resistance, you had to risk a great deal in your life.
You had to risk your life. I mean,
yes, you had to risk your life, but not just your own life. Let's remember your lives of your friends and family, your entire community, could come under, death squad. And so I think this is an important message in our time. It happens to be set during World War II, but the message, the actions, the way these women stuck together during the resistance, during their time in the concentration camp, and then for decades afterwards, that to me is something different. It's not simply a single act of heroism. It's not simply a moment in the war that turned the tide in battle. This is about long evolving and long held relationships. And I think that's something we'll all need to hold on to in the days to come.
Well, enough murderous Nazis. Let's move on to other murderers. Let's talk about serial killers. And I guess these are individual versions in a peculiar way of the Nazis. A very interesting new book by Caroline Fraser, Murderland.
Yes.
Crime and Bloodlust in the Time of Serial Killers. Is serial killing, according to Fraser at least, Bethanne, is that a peculiarly modern phenomenon like industrialized Nazi death camps, gas chambers?
I think she is less interested in serial killing overall throughout history than she is in what grew up in the Pacific Northwest in the 1950s, 1960s, and into the 1970s, because she's from Seattle. She's written about the West.
Ted Bundy and the Night Stalker, the Green
Right.
River Killer, all these.
Exactly. And so she's asking, why was this outbreak? Why were there so many of these men? Does the Pacific Northwest breed serial killers?
Maybe it's because it rains so much up there. Is that a possibility?
That could be very depressing, but it's not a whodunit. It's a why did this happen? So as you mentioned, there's Ted Bundy, the Green River Killer, the Night Stalker, the Hillside Strangler, even Charles Manson. There are connections that she makes to the Pacific Northwest. And so she's asking, are there factors like the rain, the constant rain, behind what happened? And in particular, Fraser is interested in environmental toxicity because there was a lot of smelting of lead and arsenic in the Pacific Northwest in these decades. And in fact, I don't know if you call it ASARCO or if you say ASARCO, but this was the big smelting company. It happens to be owned by the Guggenheim family, or was owned by the Guggenheim family. And so by the 70s, by the mid 70s, the number of serial killers in that region had decreased. And so Fraser says, well, there were environmental protections being put into place. Is that why they decreased? I don't know. I mean, talk about something you don't know enough about to argue for or against.
Yeah,
but what I was going to say very quickly is that I've never seen something more cogent that links environmental toxicity to really dark, disturbing crime. It's a completely different look at what goes on in a serial killer's life.
It's an intriguing argument. We should actually bring in a third book that you wanted to talk
Yes.
about. They Poison the World, Life and Death in the Age of Forever Chemicals by Maria Blake.
Yep.
I'm assuming these books are entirely different, but are there references in the Blake book about our age of forever chemicals? Fraser talks about our age of serial killers. Do either of these authors, well, I mean, certainly Blake, does she connect what was happening in the Pacific Northwest with mass murder by men?
She does not. So that's, and there's a reason why. It's because Blake's book is very specifically, and I'm going to look down at my notes because I want to make sure I say this properly, polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS. So this is the synthetic chemicals and that have been linked to cancers and stillbirths and weakened immune systems. so her book is tripartite in nature. She's got one section that is about, many people know about the Hoosick Falls, New York tragedy, because Hoosick Falls is where they were making Teflon, and it leached into the groundwater. And there were a lot of court cases. In fact, the man whose father died of liver cancer, who is sort of the protagonist for this section of the book, uh, ultimately won a $65 million settlement, I believe, against the manufacturers. But this book is also about contaminated drinking water in West Virginia. And it's also about how these PFAS chemicals were developed, because they were developed by our government because the government was looking for something that wouldn't corrode when it came into contact with uranium.
But coming back, I want to talk a little bit more about.
Yeah,
sure. But coming back to the Fraser book, and her argument is an interesting one. Why weren't there mass murderers in West Virginia, given the corrosion of the soil there?
Blake hasn't written that book, and I don't know if she's looked at that. This is, her very narrow slice about the Pacific Northwest and smelting specifically. So I would love to see these two in conversation.
Yeah, be interesting. But coming back to the Fraser book, Murderland, I don't know. I think there were some female serial killers, but very few compared to male. Is there a strongly gendered element in Murderland, in Fraser's Murderland?
I think there is. I think there's a strongly gendered element in it, because she's also talking about things like, the way men are raised and the politics going on in the United States at the time, and the sort of ideal that some of these men had about, being the ultimate the smarter than anyone hermit kind of thing. I am greater than anyone. My, thoughts are so strong. No one is as smart as I am. And the way capitalism sort of raises people up into believing that if they have an idea and they believe in that idea, that means they're geniuses. I am taking things really liberally right now, so please forgive me, Ms. Fraser, but it is definitely a book that wants to look at how the atmosphere in the nation, in the region, and in the minds of these particular men, these particular serial killers, how that all came togetger. So
they didn't even have the internet. I mean, yeah. I wonder whether we'll get a book by Richard Reeves in defense of male serial killers, or maybe we have to understand them a little better.
I would say so. But it is a really intriguing, atmospheric book that will make you think hard about how these substances that all of us take in, from our water, from the air.
This is not Murderland. This is the other one. They poison.
No, I'm talking about Murderland, actually. I'm talking about the arsenic and the lead. Those are heavy metals. They're really, really bad for us. And so it stands to reason that people who were exposed to those without protections, when companies were just dumping them into rivers and various other places, that someone might be affected. And of course, everyone's going to be affected differently. Not everyone is going to turn into a serial killer. So this is a book, I think, that is very important and very intriguing, but it is not something, at least, you can't say, oh, well, this is why that it's Ted Bundy.
I know the title for this show is going to be the last one was we get the Gatsby we deserve. Now we get the serial killers we deserve.
We get the serial killers we deserve. Exactly.
And maybe we get the books we deserve. Another book that seems very intriguing, which is deeply historical. It seems completely of another age now. The CIA Book Club, The Secret Mission to Win the Cold War with Forbidden Literature. I bet the publishers love this book. This is a book that comes out with Penguin Random House. The power of books. Is this CIA book club the way in which Americans use books to win the Cold War? Is this a nostalgic narrative about the power of books, and another pre-internet book, a pre-AI book?
I think so in some ways, but it is such a great read. This is the most wonderful beach book for fans of espionage and Cold War history. And it really is about the Cold War. It's not about World War II, for a change. Okay.
Yeah,
So
it's not about female resistance to Nazis.
that's no more of that. This is about how a man named George Minden, who was a Romanian who had emigrated to the United States, uh, convinced the CIA that the best way to change hearts and minds behind the Iron Curtain would be through literature. And that's because people who were either imprisoned, or maybe they were under house arrest, or maybe they weren't able to work at their creative careers or as journalists, etc., that they really wanted literature. They wanted to know what was going on in the world. And so English focuses, there's a couple of reasons for
Yeah, and
this.
the author of this book, it has a wonderful name, Charlie English. Could have
I
been
know, isn't
invented
that
by
great? He was
John
at
Le
the
Carre. Is
Guardian
there
for a
really
long
someone
time.
called Charlie English?
Charlie English. So Charlie English focuses on Poland for a couple of reasons. Reason number one, which makes a lot of sense, is because Poland, even through the war and afterwards, and even after becoming part of the East Bloc, maintained a lot of ties to the West. Poland has many, many different kinds of people in Poland in the upper classes spoke French for a long, long time. They understood literature from the rest of Europe. But the second reason
I
is that
just have to jump in here, just in defense of the other peoples invaded by the Soviets after the war. I mean, you could have said the same about East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Hungary. So, I mean, the Poles weren't unique in that sense.
well, that's English argues that they were.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yeah, and he says it's because they had a particular, they were the crossroads, right? They were constantly invaded and conquered. And I happen to be part Polish, so I guess I have a little bit of a bias that went along with English's hypothesis. I agree with you. There are plenty of other people in other countries in the East Bloc who also wanted
Yeah,
all
just a
of
shout
this.
out certainly
But
to
let
the
me get to
Czechs
the
and the
second reason,
Hungarians.
which is much more important and much, I think, funnier in a way. Basically, the files about these books that were smuggled into Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, those files are still classified. So this is why we focus on Poland. Charlie English has this great source. Okay, the source is named. Let me see if I can get this one right. It's oh shoot. Now I'm Mirosław Czojecki. Okay, so he was a Polish underground or samizdat publisher, and he agreed to speak with English and give him all of his memories of these book smuggling days. And it was really smuggling. They would hide things in like boxes of tampons or in
Yeah.
suitcase lining, or they put a really boring academic book's jacket on a copy of, I don't know, Anna Karenina.
So what were the books? I mean, I'm guessing Orwell would have been a popular book. Was it the classics? What were the kind of books being smuggled in?
You'd be surprised. So there was a lot of Alexander Solzhenitsyn, of course. People wanted to read the Gulag Archipelago.
Although I'm sure in Poland there was some ambivalence about a Russian dissident.
Yes, I'm sure there was. But this is one of English's points. People didn't just want important nonfiction political treatises. They wanted Agatha Christie mysteries. They wanted Shakespeare plays. They wanted new novels that were coming out and winning the Pulitzer. They wanted all kinds of information. This was about culture and not about political intelligence. So one of the people that he talked to said, we read poetry and literature because it shows us that there are like-minded people who are above nationality, who can empathize with us, who admire beauty and who admire virtue.
What years was this? So
So
were
this
there
is
no books? Were there no
50s to
Polish
the 80s.
classics in the libraries?
This is the 50s to the 80s. And so this is a book that would make the best TV series, Andrew, because you've got so many different layers. You know, you've got the publishers who gave books to George Minden in his New York office. You've got the people who were the operatives who were bringing the books across borders. You've got the people who were longing for the books and couldn't wait to read them. I mean, it just gives, it would be such a terrific historical drama of some kind. There's so many moving parts. And so I think we've forgotten in the US that ideas can have a lot of power when you are in a repressive regime. And just being able to read a book that talks about freedom or talks about, you know, crossing from one country to another, or has a great theme of whatever it happens to be, war or peace. I mean, you want to read a
Are we at
tale
a
of two
point now
cities.
where the Poles are going to start smuggling books into the United States, all these forbidden books?
That would be really interesting and really ironic. But one thing I will say is that I've noticed, even when it's with people who are my contemporaries, as opposed to, you know, my undergraduate students, when you say the word samizdat, many people do not know what you're talking about. And it it could be something that happens here when we're not allowed to, you know, write stories about reproductive rights, when we're not allowed to write stories that, you know, Trump doesn't want in the United States Naval Academy Library, that kind of thing.
And then just very briefly, because we need to move on to
Yeah.
the last book in your selection for
Mhm.
this show. But was this really an official CIA initiative?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. Minden actually had a committee. Um, I'm trying to remember the FEC, foreign, maybe he called it like Foreign Exchange Committee or something like that, but he actually had a committee dedicated to this. And there were hundreds of publishers who participated in sending books through Minden's office. And he was working partly even at the end. I'm not sure at the beginning, but at the end, you know, the CIA was run by Bill Casey in the Reagan years. And
Right,
so,
and so incredibly controversial organization. I
yeah,
mean, this was the kind of the literary version of Radio Free Europe. I'm
yes,
guessing, I'm not sure how
yes,
much was known about this, but I'm
yes.
guessing progressives, certainly progressives who had a degree of sympathy with the Soviet Union, would have been highly offended with the CIA book club.
Yeah, I'm sure, which is, again, we've still got the files classified. So we only have Charlie and his friend Miroslav Trojecki's word for it right now, but it is a fascinating word. And Trojecki has a great many memories and things to say. So I recommend checking it out.
Yeah, it sounds like a fascinating book.
It
Actually,
is.
all the books, this is the one I probably would read. Finally, your fifth book, your fifth nonfiction book, uh, which you are suggesting people have a look at this late spring. Mother Emanuel, 2 centuries of race, resistance, and forgiveness in one Charleston church. So this is both contemporary and historical. Tell us
Yes.
about this book. It's by Kevin Sack.
So Kevin Sack is the New York Times reporter who actually covered the horrendous 2015 massacre at Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina. It's been there for 200 years.
Yeah, it was
It
a
is,
2015 hate crime.
yes, and so that is why Sack, who is white, wrote this book. And if you read interviews with him, you'll see that he has a great deal of humility about having written it. And also, he learned a great deal in writing it too. And so he spends less time on the crime and more time on what made this Emmanuel AME church so vital to its community and the city of Charleston for all
Mm.
of these years. Because I, I think I'm paraphrasing Sack, but forgiveness isn't about forgiving the killer. Forgiveness for this congregation, these people, specifically with the kind of Christianity they practice, is about self preservation. Forgiveness is about saying, I am going to move on because there have been hard times before, there may be hard times in the future, but I am going to let this go so that I can continue to live and worship in this community. It is very, very interesting to Sack and to me, and I think to a lot of people, that enslaved Africans embraced the faith of their oppressors. And that is not to say they shouldn't have. That is just to say this is something that he really wants to look at. How can you reshape a religion that is argued for your oppression? It's argued so that it can oppress you, but then shape it, as Emmanuel did, into a liberation theology. And Emmanuel has its problems. It is not a perfect church. It has a lot of financial things that have gone wrong. They've lost people, they've gained people. It goes back and forth and up and down, but it still remains a beacon of the way that people who were actually enslaved in this country found their own way through to, again, I'm using the word hope a lot. I swear I sound like Barack Obama.
No, it sounds like Bill Clinton or Barack Obama. It's interesting that we did a show a few months ago with Edward Ball, who's Slaves in the Family, is
Mhm.
about the Ball family of Charleston, South Carolina. And of course, that was one of the centers. The Bulls at one point in the late 18th century was the largest slave owning family or business in the United States. Is there something uniquely Charlestonian about it? It's always seemed a town very different from anywhere else in America.
Charleston, I think, is a fascinating place. I do not care for the politics of the state of South Carolina these days, but one of the things I think we all should remember is that Charleston was a beacon of religious freedom in our colonial past. It is the place where the first synagogue in the United States was established. I believe that was even in the 17th century, maybe in the 18th. Don't quote me on that. But Charleston is a very sophisticated city with a lot of cosmopolitan ties to different cultures. And so Emmanuel Church is also, not just a teeny tiny little place. It's a part of the city's vibrant and always entangled communities. Even if there are different classes, even if there is racial injustice and racism, Charleston still retains a lot of different layers of what we might call cosmopolitan.
Yeah, and the forgiveness part of this is particularly interesting. Of
Yes,
course, slavery was one of, along with the Holocaust, was one of the great crimes in history.
yes.
What can this book teach us about forgiveness? I mean, we began this book about the sisterhood of Ravensbrück. I'm
Mhm.
not sure if there was anything in there about forgiving this terrible crime, but maybe we can, in these, what some people consider at least, Bethanne, dark times, what can we learn from the Sack book about Mother Emanuel about forgiveness of unimaginable crimes like slavery?
Well, as I said a few minutes ago, the people at Emmanuel believe that forgiveness is all about moving on and being able to say, I am whole and I am still free. I've preserved myself. And I think they might have more in common with the French women we talked about earlier in the show than you might believe, because that's exactly what they did. They did not spend their time licking their wounds, if you will. They did something. They said, we are still here. What can we do for all of us. How do we preserve ourselves? How do we preserve what we've done, recognize what we've done, and protect the women who weren't recognized? So self-preservation, I think that is a great lesson from history that we can see today, in maybe not all of these books, but in some of them.
Well, there you have it. 5 very meaty books: The Sisterhood of Ravensbrück by Lynn Olson, Murderland by Caroline Fraser, The CIA Book Club by Charlie English, real Charlie English, They Poison the World by Maria Blake, and last and certainly not least, Kevin Sachs' Mother Emanuelle. If you can't find a book to read there, then I'm not sure what I can do with you. As always, Bethanne Patrick, book critic, Los Angeles Times, the best read woman or person in America. Thank you so much for putting up with my obnoxious questions. So we get, not only do we get the serial killers we deserve, we get the book critics we deserve. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again in the next few days, because I know you've got some other books. Thank